Hello, I'm John Perkins, author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman, third edition, China's Economic Hitman Strategy and Ways to Stop the Global Takeover. And so on this program, we're going to talk about how China and the United States are competing in a race that's really taking us to disaster, to a death economy, an economic system that no longer works. And how so much of the rest of the world, Africa, Latin America, and many other countries are looking to China to be the number one trading partner and investor. And in fact, China has already become the number one trading partner and investor in these countries because of the number of factors that we're going to talk about in this program. And as a third thing, we're really going to look at how we move beyond this. How does China and the United States join forces to come together to recognize that there's a common enemy, as though it was aliens coming down from outer space, that we are the aliens, our attitude that we are a part from rather than a part of nature has alienated us. So it's really time for these two countries to come together and insist and map out a plan to transform the death economy to a life economy. All that and the show yet to come. Thanks.
Welcome back to part two of our delicious conversation with John Perkins, who is the author of Confessions of an Economic Hitman. Only this time, we're in the third version of that book. And he's talked in part one, we talked about what the economic hitman strategy was originally, which was a governmental thing and large organizations like the World Bank. And now it became a corporate thing in phase two, where companies would have their own economic hitmen. And now we're in phase three, which is how China is using this strategy and what they're doing and how they're applying it. And in part one, we talked about the US and China and how they've been competing and how China brought 700 million people out of poverty and how that's very appealing when the rest of the world looks at it. But there's a dark side to China that I don't have to explain to you, and about their system that's certainly not a democratic process. We also talked about a death economy, and this was a really important piece, that we're running this idea of increased GDP, which is actually about how the wealthiest people are wealthier, but increasing the GDP, increasing consumerism, and not really caring about anything else. And it's become a death economy. And John was talking about creating a regenerative life economy. We talked a lot about that. In the part two of the show, we want to talk specifically about this competition between the two nations, between the US and between China, their mechanisms and how they compete. Because we as we're recording this, the U.S. Has just met with China in Munich, and that didn't go that well. So I'm really interested to hear from you, John. As we're recording this, the U.S. Has just met with China in Munich, and that didn't go that well. So I'm really interested to hear from you, John, about how is it possible that China and the U.S. can work together, particularly with so much tension around Taiwan, with tension around China backing Russia in the Russia-Ukraine war. There's a lot of pieces on the board in the context of this chess game. Tell us what's your thoughts on this?
Well, thanks, Bill. I think it's unfortunate that we inherit a history of them versus us. Mm-hmm. Philosophy that seems to drive politicians and continues to drive politicians. And yeah, you mentioned we criticize China for the Uyghurs and its minorities, we for Hong Kong and Taiwan, and for its suppression of freedom of speech and so on and so forth. Mm-hmm. When I talk to my friends in Latin America and other places, they say, yeah, well, that's true, but what about the United States' treatment of immigrants, Latin American immigrants? How do you treat them? And what about your treatment of incarcerated minorities? And what about your wars in Afghanistan and Iraq? And on and on. So other countries will look and say, yeah, both of you are doing some pretty bad things. but which model is going to bring us the greatest economic prosperity?
Mm-hmm.
Who's going to help us bring the most people out of poverty? And it's kind of easy to look and say it's China right now for them to look that way. The other thing is that the United States, when we give loans to countries, we say, hey, accept this loan from us and hire our companies to build infrastructure projects, and you'll show economic progress. Oh, and incidentally, you need to buy into neoliberal economic policies. And these are policies that basically cut taxes on the rich, cut social services on everyone else, privatize corporations and sell them to our investors, and do away with government regulations. That's neoliberal economics. It's this idea of open up, be free, no regulations and so forth. And we impose that on other countries through the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, when we give them loans. China doesn't do that at all. And countries like this, they say China makes a point of not interfering, of not telling us what kind of government we should have. They don't care whether we're a democracy or what we are. They don't try to dictate these things to us. So there's this, China has done an amazing job of marketing programs, and it has this idea of the new Silk Road, which is a trading network that interconnects everyone. So China will say, well, we're going to help you build ports in Peru or Ecuador or Panama, so that you can not only trade with other countries in the hemisphere, but you can also trade with Africa and Asia and Europe and the Middle East. And the United States never did that. We were very bilateral. We'd say, so look, Ecuador, look, Panama, look, Peru, you trade with us, with the United States. We'll have these free trade agreements, which is kind of an anachronism. But China now is saying, no, we're going to help you trade with the whole world. So there's this very attractive marketing package that China offers. And I'm not trying to defend it. It has a lot of problems. China has built some very, very bad projects in many places, a huge electric power plant, a big hydroelectric plant in Ecuador that's totally failing and has caused huge problems in that country. It builds bad dams. I was just in the Bahamas where they built a soccer stadium that's falling apart now, and on and on. So I'm not defending one versus the other. What I am saying is that these two countries now are in a competition for hegemony, for world dominance. It's a race.
Yes.
It's a race to disaster, though. It's a race to the death economy. It's a race to taking us to the precipice of self-destruction as a species. And we've got to stop it. We need to turn it around. And these two countries who have so much influence all over the world need to come together, if possible, and promote the life economy, the transformation, to understand that nobody survives, nobody prospers, nobody survives on a dead planet.
Right. And
people, I was just with a very popular writer and well-known speaker, and we were together at a venue in Central America speaking, and I'm not going to mention names, but he was very negative. He said, well, China and the United States can never come together. They can never agree. The cultures are too different. There's too much competition. And I said, well, you could have said the same thing about Germany and Japan and the United States back during World War II. But when there was a common enemy, which was the Soviet Union, the Cold War, they came together. And you could say the same with, the history of the world, basically. Yes. European countries. France was fighting Spain, and they both were fighting England, and they all came together. So they come together to fight a common enemy. And where I get hope now is to help people understand that we have a common enemy. And if think about it this way, think if there was a spacecraft hovering above us, a UFO, and we were being attacked by aliens, what would China and the United States do? I think they would come together to fight the aliens.
I think I'd like to believe that.
Well, history tells that they would. If we're all being threatened, they'll come together.
Right.
And I think what we need to do now is see that we are the aliens. Human beings are not aliens, but our philosophy has alienated us from the planet. We've said we are a part from, not a part of nature.
Yes.
Human supremacy over nature. We have the right to exploit this planet without any limitations. That's alienated us. And so we've created this death economy out of that alienation. And the Chinese are understanding this. There's no question. I'm in China. They really get it because they've been polluting the hell out of themselves. They hate that. The young people hate it. And I think Americans are getting it more and more. Europeans are getting it. People around the world are understanding that we have a common enemy. And it's our philosophy that's created this death economy. It's our philosophy of exploitation, of alienation, of short-term materialistic consumption and short-term profits. So if we can all understand that there's a common enemy, and we can disagree about everything else. We can disagree about Taiwan and Hong Kong and Afghanistan and Iraq. We can disagree about just about everything, but let's agree that we want to survive. And we want our children and our grandchildren and great-grandchildren to inherit a planet that they will thank us for. So let's come together to make that happen.
So let's look at this from another position, which is the meeting in Davos, right? The World Economic Conference. Charles Schwab, the Great Reset, et cetera, et cetera. That seems to be talking about what you're talking about. Seems to be. But I don't know too many people who really trust that that's in the, like you'll own nothing. I get that. I'm not opposed to that. You'll own nothing, you'll be happy. You can rent shit, you can share shit. Great, that's fantastic. But there's this sense of malevolence, like there's something going on underneath all of that that's manipulative. And so we are at the place, you're saying about people are waking up, but that with that waking up comes a lack of trust, and certainly a lack of trust of the American government, which we're seeing, but it's also a lack of trust of anybody else. And that's where it becomes a problem of us coming together, because we don't trust Charles Schwab, neither do I, but I don't trust the American government either, at a larger level of what I mean by that, or the British government for that matter, or any of those, because there's, again, as you talked about earlier, they're about filling their own coffers. So where do you go with that when you hear things like the World Economic Conference and those ideas that are often put forward certainly around an economic and ecological, less destructive process? It seems like a good idea, but,
Yeah. So but I'm going to answer that by way of sort of an example or kind of a story. That back in 2019 at the business roundtable, 100, I can't remember, it was about 100 executives, top executives from Fortune 500 companies met, and they signed a statement that said that they can no longer be about maximizing profits. They have to be about taking care of all their stakeholders, their clients, and that included local communities, that they had to serve local communities. They made this very strong statement that they were moving away from this idea of maximization of short-term profits. And afterwards, I talked to some of those executives, and they said, "Well, yeah, that is our commitment. And we want that. We get grandchildren. We want a better world. The problem is we have to deal with Wall Street. We have to deal with big investors, and so you people, you consumers, have to force us to do what we want to do." It's a little bit like President Franklin Roosevelt, at the end of World War II, met with union leaders from the auto industry. And after the end of the meeting, shaking hands with these guys and saying, "I think you know that I agree with you. I want to do what you want done, but you're going to go out and make your rank and file force me to do it." And we're kind of in that situation where we, the consumer, have a lot of power. And investors, consumers, investors, workers, and companies, all of us are in one of those categories or several of those categories. And, I've had these executives say, "Hey, write me a letter saying, I love your company. I love your products, but I'm not going to buy them anymore until you pay your workers in Indonesia a fair salary, a living wage. And send that to me, but also send it to all your social networking circles and ask them to send it to all of theirs. And if I get 100,000 of these, I've got a little matrix I get every month of what our customers are saying. I don't read these emails, but I get a matrix that tells me. And if I can take this to my primary investors, I can say, well, these are our customers. We've got to listen. Well, I think that there's this movement, Dov, and in Guatemala, on this trip I was recently on, there was a senior vice president from HP, Hewlett Packard.
Mm-hmm.
He was in charge of global marketing and has over 11,000 employees reporting to him. And he was very proud to point out that Newsweek had designated HP as the number one greenest company in the United States. And he said, it's partly our investors. We've got institutional as well as private investors like Hathaway, Berkshire Hathaway, BlackRock. And he said they don't always do the right thing, but they are really pushing us. They are pushing us to become greener and greener and greener.
BlackRock are?
Yeah.
Wow.
In this particular case, at least. So I think some of these investment organizations, they're hedging. So on the one hand, they're making money off fossil fuels, but on the other hand, they're going to some of these companies and saying, because we're making big profits off fossil fuels, we can afford to invest in the long term and not set short-term profits with somebody like HP or other companies. So again, we're at this period of time when these kind of decisions are being made. I can make money over here so that I can do good things over there, that kind of thing, which is not necessarily ethically acceptable. But the fact of the matter, and Berkshire Hathaway has some very good history of social and environmentally responsible investment. Anyway, this guy at HP who was very, very committed to a better future and to making his company says everybody in our company is part of the company culture now, and our investors, we seek out investors who support this, or investors seek out investors who want a better world, seek us out. I think there's a movement. I like to think of this. Well, Dov, despite your accent, you're in Canada.
I am,
and so you know what a hockey stick is.
I do.
Yeah. So I think we're at the hockey stick,
the time.
And we've been moving along this consciousness raising curve very, very slowly, but we're right now at this point where we're starting to go up. And consciousness is rising about what we need to do and how we need to change our goals from maximizing short-term profits and materialistic consumption to taking care of the future. We're right there at this corner, and I'm hoping that we're going to shoot up. Hockey stick, we're going to get the blade going up there real soon. That's what my hope is, and I know that for that to happen, people like you and me and others out there need to keep pushing for it. And we need to be optimistic, but realistically optimistic.
Yes.
It isn't going to happen just like that. We are going to have the Black Rocks that'll invest in certain bad things. Yeah. And that's going to happen. But we've got to keep moving this toward that transition. We've got to recognize that we're just on this curve in the hockey stick, and we got to get a.
Well, I think that, what I'm hearing from you here is the recognition of the individual, in that you can vote with your feet and you can vote with your dollars. You can walk away and you can spend your dollar somewhere else. So when I look at that, John, and I may take you in an area that you might say, okay, that's not my area, that's fine. But I also look at things like Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, and Ted, what's his name? Ted Turner, are now the three largest farmland owners in the United States. I mean, they own enough farmland that's bigger than most states between the three of them. It's massive. I mean, what Ted Turner's bought is insane. These are people from completely different industries. And at the same time, we're seeing this whole movement around, again, I think it's greenwashing, my opinion, is, oh, we got to go vegan. Well, actually, if you go vegan, you start poisoning people, because if you look on the, if you flip over the, what's it called? The better than meat or something it's called. You look at, it's like, this is shit. This is chemicals. This is all highly refined oils that are very bad for human beings. We don't process this stuff. We don't do well with it. And the farmland's disappearing into the hands of these big corporate money people. It seems to me like part of that death economy is being sold to us through a green language, like, let's go vegan. Well, I don't know about that. What I do know is that stuff grows where animals have been. Stuff does not grow where animals have not been, right? So it's a fascinating dichotomy for me, because I'm always looking at, well, pull back the layers. And I know that's what you've done your entire career. You've been pulling back these layers and saying, yeah, it looks like this, but it's actually that. Do you see anything in that?
Well, there's certainly greenwashing going on. There's no question about it. People are taking advantage of it. But at the same time, I do think we're moving in a direction against that hockey stick thing of real change, change that's happening. And there'll always be pushback. It's let's see, Thomas Jefferson in 1774 he said, and I think historians have confirmed this, that a third of the people in America want to stay with the British.
Yep, I remember that.
A third of the people want to separate.
Don't care.
Yeah, want to separate, and a third of people don't care. And he said, we've got to reach that third that right now doesn't care. And as we reach that third, then some of the third that also wants to stay with the British, they'll move over too. And I think we're at a time like that too. And in that process, you always had con artists who were saying, oh yeah, I believe in this and that and so on. And they were basically trying to, they were lying. They were doing what the equivalent of greenwashing.
Yeah.
So that's definitely going on. But at the same time, I do think people around the world are understanding that we've got to change. And that's the first step, to perceive the need for change and the possibility of change. And it is happening.
I think that one of the, in my opinion, one of the shifts was the pandemic. And we can talk about, the movement of China to take over the world and blah, blah, blah. And we can even talk about that at a, is it biowarfare, right? Are we doing stuff like that? There's those arguments. It's a bigger conversation, much bigger conversation. But at the same time is the looking at these things when we had COVID. So let's just take it as the pandemic as a generality. I think you've heard me refer to it as the great pause, is that happened and we all took a pause. We jumped off the treadmill of the hustle and the working, and we started to reevaluate. We paused and we went, do I really need a bigger car? Do I really need a bigger apartment in New York City? Do I really, and people dropped off. And as I've talked about many times, and I know you know this, people in China, which is not a democratic country, people in Vietnam, not a democratic country, as examples, they did the same. They went, I'm not going back to work. I'm going to go back to the farm. I'm not staying in the city. I'm going to go back. I won't have much, but at least I'll have my family. There was this questioning of what really matters. And I think that's the great gift of COVID in this conversation that you're talking about and raising consciousness, is like, hold on a second. Have I just been running on this system that actually I don't give a shit about, and I didn't realize until I couldn't do it? Do you see that as being part of it too?
Yeah, totally. I agree with you. I think that COVID shook us awake in many ways. And, that's one of them. Another one that we can change and we can enjoy the change. And I also think COVID helped us understand the power of that's beyond us, that humans are not supreme, that a little tiny virus that we can't even see had a huge impact. And yes, eventually we sort of have tamed it, but we also know that, the probability is that another one will come along at some time. Will we be able to change it or not? Well, we'll see. But we also really had to take a look at how the oceans are rising and the pollution, and COVID showed us that when we stopped running factories, places that have been covered in smog suddenly didn't have smog anymore. And so it taught us a lot about that, about the fact that we are vulnerable. And we don't want to admit it. We used to look at these once in 100-year events as local. Oh, there's another big hurricane. But if once the hurricane's over, if I survive, the outside world will come to my rescue, bringing me water and food. Well, with COVID, we realized there was no outside world.
No.
We're all in this together. And we have come to a solution. We've come to a sort of an equilibrium, I guess would be the best way to put it. But I think it has taught us that there is no outside world, that we're all in this together. Everybody on the planet was affected by that tiny little invisible virus. I mean, my God, think about it. What power, incredible. We're all impacted. And then that taught us, well, yes, we're all impacted by climate change too. We're all impacted by the huge migrations that are occurring because of climate change and because of starvation and because of quite frankly, many of our policies, our economic policies, our trade policies. And we're all impacted by species extinctions and on and on and on. And the bees are disappearing. When the bees disappear, the flowers don't get pollinated. When the flowers don't get pollinated, blah, 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 blah. It goes on and on.
Yeah.
I think we've learned something in these years, and it may take a few more years for it to really, really settle in what we've learned. But there is this process, this consciousness revolution that we're going through. And let's not forget, though, that whenever there's a revolution, there's pushback. Those who represent the status quo try to stop it, and they try to convince us that it's futile. You can't change. That's just the way it is. And besides that, you don't really want to change. And things are good. Well, we're getting that. But good revolutionaries or good agents of change will see that as confirmation that they're winning. It's like, I've been a martial artist most of my life, and I know that if I'm up against a guy who's a lot bigger and stronger than me, I can't overpower him. I'm going to have to beat him somehow else. I'm going to have to use his energy against him. I'm going to have to outsmart him. We're in that position now, I think, where the pushback that's coming from those who represent the status quo, we need to take that energy and let it energize us to know that we're moving forward and we're doing well.
Well, there's an old saying that they're losing control when they tighten their grip.
That's it.
Right.
Yeah.
So, take that as a positive sign. If they're tightening their control, then suddenly they are definitely, if they've tightened their grip, they're losing control. And it is up to us. We have to make those decisions, and we have to come together. The challenges is doing it in a way that is loving and compassionate and caring for each other and the planet, as opposed to storming the bloody Capitol, and finding ways to come together for things that we care about. And I talked about this in my work around the emotional source code. I said, if you went to the Capitol on January the 6th and you interviewed any of those people, it might be easy to look at the crowd and go, these are a bunch of crazy people. But the truth of the matter is they weren't crazy. There were some crazies for sure, but there's always some crazies in every group. But these were people who genuinely thought they were losing their freedom and they were fighting for their freedom. And so having people see that your freedom is being taken away in ways you're not aware of, like we've been talking about, and realizing that the freedom of your children, your grandchildren to breathe is going to be very difficult. As I've said to some of I have some hardcore conservative friends who say, this climate change stuff is bullshit. And I'm like, okay, listen, let's say you don't believe it's man created. And you go, I don't. Okay, fine. But can you ignore that there are changes in climate? And they're like, well, no. And I said, I love what Mitt Romney said. Now, Mitt Romney is a conservative Republican. And he said, there are people who want the Republican leadership, to want it to go away from Trump. They want the Republican leadership. And he goes, and one of the first things we want to do is deal with the environment. And people were shocked when they said this like 2 months ago. People were shocked. Like, so you believe in climate change? And you believe we're causing climate change? And he said, I hope so. Stunned them. And he said, I hope so. And they said, why? He goes, because if we're not, we can't do anything about it. But if we are, we can. And I was like, yes, that landed. That was beautiful, because that was saying it doesn't matter whether you agree or disagree. What matters is the evidence is there. We can see there's changes. If we're adding to it, let's not add, because if we don't add to it, we'll sign up if it gets better. And if we keep adding to it, it's definitely going to get worse. So I just thought it was profoundly simple. Like, let's hope it is us, because if we do something about it, we can make a difference. And I think that that's what we've all got to do in our lives, is look at what is the difference we can make today. And at the same time, I think we've got to fight against this bullshit greenwashing, i.e., like I said, I still recycle, but I hate the fact that 5% is being recycled. It annoys the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Like, why aren't we doing better? Germany does better.
Yeah.
Germany has been recycling since the 70s.
Yeah.
Right? We've taken up in recent years, and it's cool, and we got the right colored bins.
Yeah. 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 And, I get back to this thing about climate change. Imagine if you're sitting on an airplane and the pilot comes on, he says, our mechanics tell us that there's a real possibility that if we take off in this plane, it's going to crash but I'm willing to take that risk if you guys are, because I'm not sure, and the mechanics can't tell us that we absolutely will crash, but just that there's a decent probability that we will crash. Let's take a vote. How would you vote?
Yeah. You staying on the plane?
And that's the climate change thing. Like, okay, maybe we're not creating climate change, but there is a possibility.
Right.
Some evidence that points to that. And you may not believe that evidence, but if there's any possibility at all that it might be happening, shouldn't we take that possibility seriously? If there's any possibility the plane is going to crash, wouldn't I want to get off? Yeah.
Yeah. Well, as I've said many times to people, maybe we're not doing it. Maybe it is, we've seen the results that there has been many climate changes on the planet, freezing cold, screaming hot. It's gone through that. It doesn't matter. What matters is, are you speeding it up?
Yeah.
That's the only thing, because then you have to say, oh, well, I'm giving my grandkids no chance. I'm giving my kids no chance. Okay. Are you okay with that? Are you okay with saying, I'm getting off the plane, but I'm going to leave the kids on? I'm getting off, but I'm leaving the kids on. It's like, okay, because that's really what you're doing.
Yeah.
You're getting off because you're going, okay, well, yeah, I just don't want to take a chance, but I'll just leave the kids on. I'll meet them in Miami, which is sinking, by the way, but that's a whole other subject.
I'll take the bus to the sinking city.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So, John, as we come to the end, tell us, obviously, we're listening as one-on-one people. Well, the third book is about the third wave, which I've sort of refined as the rise of the dragon. But it's about this third wave, and that seems very big. And it seems like, well, who am I against China? What can we as individuals do? How can we get in the way of the third wave? How can we step in and make it better to get us away from a death economy and interfere with this economic hitman strategy even in the third wave?
Yeah, I think we have to start by recognizing that we are in a death economy. It can't last. It can't go on. It's either going to stop with catastrophe after catastrophe after catastrophe. That's always a possibility. That we've now got 8 billion people on the planet. That by the year 2030, by the year 2300, we might only have a billion. Maybe less. I think that's a possibility. But what can we do to try to make that sure that doesn't happen? Because we recognize that our kids and grandchildren might not be among those that survive. And so we start with that premise, and then we have to look at, well, what can each of us do? And I go into this in some detail in the book, which I obviously don't have time to do here. But to make a long story short, there are a lot of things we can do. And one of the most important is to ask ourselves, each one of us, because it starts with us, what is it I most want to do for the rest of my life? And I would answer, I want to write. I love to write. And I have a friend who's a carpenter who would answer, I want to work with my hands and wood, kind of the opposite end of the spectrum. And the second question, though, is key, and that is, how do I do this in a way that helps to transform the death economy to a life economy? And I would answer by saying, oh, well, I want to write about that. I want to inspire people to get involved in that. My carpenter friend would say, I want to use sustainable materials. And every one of us, though, can do something. And if you're a parent, just one child, you can teach one child about this. Or everybody can ask these questions. And the third question is, well, what's stopping me? What's getting in the way? And as a writer, I might say, well, I don't have time to write every day. And I know to be a successful writer, I've got to write every day. It's like a pianist has to play the piano every day, and so on and so forth. And my carpenter friend might say, well, my clients don't want to pay the extra price for sustainable materials. And the fourth question is, when I confront that thing that's holding me back, what wisdom do I get by confronting it, by understanding it? And I would say, well, I could say, I'll turn off the television for an hour every night and write. That would give me an extra 7 hours a week. If I did it for 2 hours, I'd get an extra 14 hours. That's a lot of time. And the carpenter friend will say, well, I'm going to tell my clients that this isn't, that the extra price is not a cost, it's an investment in the future for them and their kids. And the fifth question is, what actions do I take immediately? The writer has to write. And the carpenter has to build this cabinet here in this house and tell the people, hey, and tell their kids, hey, you may be paying just a little bit more, but you're investing in the future, just as though you're getting a better education or you're learning a craft or putting some money. This is an investment in the future. And I think, Dov, that every one of us, if we ask ourselves these 5 questions, and I go into more detail in the book of course, I do that, but we all come to the conclusion that the most important thing is to do what we most want to do for the rest of our lives, because that's what's going to be the most successful. Dream big. And we can all do it in a way that helps to create a life economy. It's just a matter of looking at being creative. How do we do this? Whether we're a plumber or a teacher or a bus driver or a show host like you or a parent, whatever we are. Sure. Every one of us can do this, and we can do it in a way that'll bring us satisfaction. Joseph Campbell's idea of follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss.
Follow your bliss, because that's when you're going to be successful. Do it in a way that helps transform the death economy to a life economy, because when we do something for future generations, it brings us even more joy than if we're just doing it for ourselves. The idea of doing something for ourselves, but that's also bigger than ourselves is where the ecstasy.
Yeah, that's the difference between following your passion and following your purpose. When you follow your passion, that's great, it's for you. But when you follow your purpose, you're doing something you absolutely love that will serve an ideal that's far bigger than you. I love that. Thank you.
Yeah.
John, as always, my friend, it is a pleasure and honor. Thank you so much for being with us. It is always an honor. Again, please tell our viewers and our listeners where they can find out more about you and about the books and anything else you want to tell them?
Thanks. Well, I want to say, know that you're blessed to be living at this time in history, because this is a time when we have an opportunity to evolve in an amazing way. That our human species is at a point of evolution, a new evolution into this life economy, and you're part of it. And you can find out more about me at johnperkins.org. That's the simplest place, and it'll take you to many other things. There's where you can order my books or go on trips with me to visit shamans and indigenous people in the Amazon and Central America, the Mayan people. Just go to johnperkins.org and sign up for my newsletter, please. It only comes out once a month. You put your email in a little box there, and then you'll be updated on where I'm going to be. And I'd love to, if I'm traveling around, I'd love to meet your viewers. I'd love to meet you guys.
Fabulous. Thank you again, John. I hope you'll stay with us to the end. And for you, dear listener, remember that those who control the meaning for the tribe control the movement of the tribe. So think about that in the context of what we've been talking about today. What is the meaning you're applying to what it is you're doing? Whether you're a business or a political leader, think about what shapes the human condition, human behavior is meaning. You can tap into that through this work. So I'm Dov Barron. I show businesses, teams, and leaders how to harness their emotional source code to move their tribe. Because unified actualized meaning is the one single monolithic difference between greatness in individuals and in organizations. Thank you for sharing the show with everybody you know. Till next time, stay curious, my friends. Stay curious about how you can add to the regenerative economy rather than the destructive economy. How you can follow your bliss and create change as a legacy for those who come after you. I'm Dov Barron. I'm here to assist you tapping into your deepest meaning to reach that next level of clarity, focus, purpose, and profit in your life, in your business, and in your leadership. And I am out.